The room buzzed with a gentle hum of laughter and clinking glasses, a symphony of happiness woven into the fabric of my daughter, Emily's wedding. Her white dress glowed under the chandeliers, and her smile, so full of life, was the only thing keeping me from slipping too deeply into the shadows of my own memories. Memories of another white dress, another glowing smile, and promises broken beyond repair. I stood near the bar, nursing a glass of bourbon, watching Emily dance with her new husband. My little girl, now grown, had no idea how close she'd come to losing the steady foundation she thought her family was built upon. It wasn't her fault. None of it was. But tonight, in this swirl of joy and bittersweet nostalgia, she was here too, my ex-wife, Monica. Monica sat at a table near the edge of the reception hall, surrounded by friends and extended family. Her laughter drifted toward me, soft but familiar, the kind that had once been my comfort before it became a weapon. Even after all these years, there was something unsettling about the way her presence still had the power to dig under my skin. I suppose I should start at the beginning. It's a story you'd think belongs in a bad soap opera, but it was my life. It was 8 years ago when I discovered Monica was having an affair with her boss, an oily, self-assured man named Greg Timmons. The signs had been there for months. Late nights at the office, unexplained trips, and that subtle but undeniable shift in her demeanor. A certain hollowness to her smile. The warmth she once gave freely now felt like a commodity, rationed and reserved for someone else. I'd suspected but couldn't prove it until the night I followed her. A work dinner, she'd said, but something in her tone made my stomach churn. I drove to the restaurant, parked across the street, and waited. Sure enough, she emerged not with her female coworkers, as she'd claimed, but with Greg. They didn't even try to hide it, laughing and holding hands like teenagers. When he kissed her, something inside me shattered. Confronting her wasn't the hard part. It was watching her lie to my face, denying it even when I showed her the photos I'd taken. When she finally broke down and admitted it, her tears felt hollow, like she wasn't mourning our marriage, but the fact that she'd been caught. I didn't mean for it to happen, Michael, she'd pleaded. It was just, I don't know. I felt lost. Lost. What a convenient excuse for betraying the life we'd built together. I filed for divorce the next day, but I didn't stop there. Greg wasn't just her boss. He was a prominent figure in our small city, with a reputation that relied heavily on a facade of respectability. Using the photos I'd taken and a few well-placed whispers, I made sure his wife found out about the affair. She divorced him faster than you could say alimony. Then I sent the evidence to his company's board of directors. Turns out, they frowned on executives using company funds to pay for hotel rooms and extravagant gifts for their mistresses. Greg lost his job within weeks, and his reputation crumbled like a house of cards. As for Monica, she lost more than her marriage. When the affair became public knowledge, friends we'd shared for years turned their backs on her. Even her parents, devoutly religious and staunch believers in fidelity, were cold and distant. The perfect life she'd traded me for disintegrated before her eyes. I made sure of it. Some might say I went too far. Maybe I did. But at the time, it felt like justice. I wasn't just avenging my own heartbreak. I was dismantling the lie she'd built around us. At first, Emily didn't understand why her mother and I divorced. We told her it was mutual, that sometimes people grow apart. But as she got older, she started asking questions. Monica tried to paint herself as the victim, but Emily wasn't stupid. By the time she turned 18, she knew the truth. Their relationship had never been the same after that. And now, here we were, 8 years later, at Emily's wedding. Monica and I had maintained a civil relationship for Emily's sake. But civility didn't mean forgiveness, at least, not for me. As I drained the last of my bourbon, Monica approached. She looked older, though still beautiful in a way that felt almost cruel. Her green dress hugged her figure, and her hair was styled elegantly. She smiled hesitantly, a peace offering I had no intention of accepting. Michael, she began, her voice soft, can we talk? I didn't respond immediately, just stared at her, my expression unreadable. Finally, I set my glass down and nodded. Make it quick. We stepped outside onto the terrace, the cool night air a welcome reprieve from the warmth of the reception hall. For a moment, she just stood there, looking out at the city lights. I wanted to thank you, she said finally, her voice trembling slightly. Thank me? I repeated, incredulous. For what? For not making a scene tonight? She winced, but didn't look away. Number for being a good father to Emily, for being there for her in ways I couldn't be after. Everything. Her words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken regret. I know I can never undo what I did, she continued, and I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But watching Emily today, seeing how happy she is, I realized something. None of this would have been possible if you hadn't held everything together when I fell apart. I laughed bitterly. You mean when you destroyed everything? Yes, she admitted, tears welling in her eyes. I was selfish and stupid, and I hurt you in ways I'll never be able to make up for. But I wanted you to know, I'm sorry, Michael. Truly. Her apology caught me off guard. For years, I'd imagined what it would feel like to hear those words. But now that they were here, they felt hollow. Too little, too late. I didn't hold everything together for you, I said coldly. I did it for Emily. And let's be clear, the only reason we're even having this conversation is because tonight is about her, not us. Monica nodded, wiping a tear from her cheek. I know, and I don't expect anything from you. I needed to say it. For a long moment, we stood in silence, two people bound by a shared past, but separated by an unbridgeable chasm. Finally, I turned to leave. Take care of yourself, Monica. As I walked back inside, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger, pity, and maybe, just maybe, the faintest whisper of closure. The past could never be undone, but for the first time in years, I felt like it didn't own me anymore. Tonight belonged to Emily, and that was enough. As I stepped back into the reception hall, my body tense with the residual bitterness of Monica's apology, the soft strains of music and laughter washed over me. For a fleeting moment, I considered letting it all go. The closure I thought I'd sought had been handed to me, albeit poorly wrapped, and perhaps I could just enjoy the rest of the evening. But then I saw him, Greg Timmons, slinking in through the doors like a vulture circling a carcass. His smirk still carried that arrogant tilt, though it was now undercut by a subtle nervousness, a result of the years since I dismantled his life. He wasn't supposed to be here. He wasn't invited. This was Emily's day, my daughter's day, and he had no business tainting it with his presence. My fists clenched instinctively, and a storm began brewing in my chest. I could feel my pulse hammering in my ears. He was walking toward Monica's table, his swagger subdued but still present, like a cheap cologne. When she saw him, her face froze in shock. She shot a glance my way, panic etched into her features. Michael, a voice whispered at my side. It was Emily, radiant in her wedding dress, her hand brushing my arm. Is everything okay? I forced a smile, masking the thunder inside me. Everything's fine, sweetheart. Go enjoy yourself. She hesitated, her eyes flicking toward the source of my ire, but eventually nodded and rejoined her husband on the dance floor. I started toward Greg, weaving through the crowd with deliberate steps, my eyes locked on him like a predator stalking its prey. Greg, I said, my voice low and sharp as I approached their table. He turned, his smirk faltering as he met my gaze. Michael, long time no see. What the hell are you doing here? I hissed, keeping my voice low to avoid drawing attention. I came to see Monica, he said, his tone annoyingly casual. I heard she'd be here and thought, well, it's been a while. Maybe it was time to talk. To talk? To talk. I leaned closer, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You've got some nerve showing your face here. Do you have any idea what this day is about? This is my daughter's wedding, not your goddamn reunion tour. Greg raised his hands in mock surrender. Relax, Michael. I'm not here to cause trouble. Too late for that, I snapped, Leave. Now. Monica, still seated, looked up at me. Michael, please. Let's not do this here. Her words only stoked the fire. Don't you dare defend him, I growled. You brought this into our lives once, and I'm not letting it happen again. Greg stood, straightening his jacket. All right, I'll leave. No need to get so worked up. But there was something in his tone, a patronizing undertone, that made my blood boil. He was mocking me, just as he had all those years ago, and I wasn't going to let him walk away this time. As he turned to leave, I grabbed his shoulder and spun him around. You don't get to just walk away, Greg. Not after everything you've done. The moment I shoved him, the entire room seemed to freeze. Heads turned, conversation ceased, and the music faltered as the DJ scrambled to lower the volume. Michael, Emily's voice cut through the tension, alarmed and confused. Dad, what's going on? This doesn't concern you, Emily, I said without looking at her. My eyes were locked on Greg, who was now smirking again, the arrogance fully restored. Careful, Michael, he said, brushing off his jacket theatrically. You wouldn't want to make a scene in front of your little girl. That did it. I threw the first punch. It connected with his jaw, the satisfying crunch of bone meeting bone reverberating up my arm. Greg staggered back, colliding with a nearby table and sending glasses and plates crashing to the floor. Gasps rippled through the crowd, and someone screamed. Greg recovered quickly, wiping blood from his split lip with the back of his hand. Big mistake, he growled. He lunged at me, swinging wildly. I dodged the first punch, but the second clipped my shoulder. Pain shot through me, but it was nothing compared to the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I countered with a hook to his ribs, driving the air from his lungs. Around us, the room descended into chaos. Guests scrambled to get out of the way, and the groom, Emily's poor, stunned husband, was trying to pull her away from the scene. You want to ruin more lives, huh? I spat, landing another punch to Greg's stomach. Is that what you're good at? Greg grunted, swinging again and catching me in the side of the face. Stars exploded in my vision, but I shook it off, grabbing him by the collar and slamming him into a nearby pillar. Stop it! Monica's voice rang out, desperate and pleading. Stay out of this, I barked, my grip tightening on Greg's shirt. Michael, please! Emily's voice this time. I froze, her tone cutting through the haze of rage. She sounded terrified. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the tears streaming down her face, the shock and confusion in her eyes. The daughter I'd fought so hard to protect from this kind of ugliness was now standing in the middle of it. I let go of Greg, letting him slump to the ground, gasping for air. The room was silent except for the sound of his labored breathing and the whispers of the stunned crowd. I turned to Emily, my heart breaking at the sight of her. Dad, she whispered, her voice trembling. What's going on? I glanced back at Greg, who was slowly pulling himself to his feet, and then at Monica, whose face was a mix of horror and shame. The weight of what I'd done, what I'd exposed, settled over me like a lead blanket. I'll explain, I said hoarsely, my voice barely audible. But not here. Before anyone could say another word, I walked out, leaving behind the wreckage of a night that was supposed to be perfect. The next morning, I sat in my study, staring at the glass of whiskey in my hand. It was barely 9, but after the chaos of the wedding, there was no point pretending I cared about appearances anymore. The events of the previous night looped in my head like a scratched record. Greg's smug face, Emily's tearful eyes, Monica's pleading voice. I had walked away, but the fire still burned. It wasn't over, not by a long shot. Greg Timmons had re-entered my life uninvited. But now that he was here, I wouldn't stop until I obliterated him. Whatever smirk he had left, I'd carve it off his face piece by piece. I booted up my laptop and got to work. Greg thought his life had already hit rock bottom when I exposed his affair years ago. He thought losing his wife, his job, and his reputation was the end of his downfall. But what he didn't understand was that those were just the warm-up acts. Now, I wasn't just dismantling his world. I was going to salt the earth beneath it. I started with his new business. After being blackballed from corporate America, Greg had scraped together enough connections to launch a small consulting firm. From what I could gather, it was limping along, barely making enough to keep the lights on. Perfect. Using a fake name and a burner email, I contacted one of his major clients, posing as a whistleblower. I sent them fabricated documents implicating Greg in financial fraud. complete with doctored spreadsheets and a convincing paper trail. By the time they finished combing through the mess, they severed ties with him, publicly citing ethical concerns. Next, I moved on to his personal life. Through some careful digging, I discovered that Greg had a mistress, a younger woman named Candace, who was blissfully unaware of the wreckage he'd left in his wake. She lived in a high-rise apartment, her rent undoubtedly paid by Greg. I made sure she received an anonymous package containing explicit photos of Greg and Monica from their affair days, along with a letter detailing his history of deceit and manipulation. Within hours, she posted a scathing exposé about him on social media, complete with screenshots of incriminating texts. By the time Greg realized what was happening, his name was trending for all the wrong reasons. It didn't stop there. I hired a private investigator to dig deeper, and what he found was the golden ticket. Greg had been hiding offshore accounts. It wasn't illegal to have them, but the way he'd been using them to evade taxes certainly was. I forwarded the evidence to the IRS, and they were more than happy to open an investigation. The day the agents showed up at his office, Greg's entire operation shut down. Employees were sent home, files were seized, and by the evening news, his face was plastered across every channel. But the real masterpiece? That was saved for Monica. I hadn't planned to go after her again. She was already living a diminished life, relegated to a mediocre job, isolated from her family. But when I saw her defending Greg last night, something inside me snapped. She'd chosen him over me once, and even after everything, she was still protecting him. Monica had no idea that during our divorce, I'd kept copies of old documents, some of them harmless, others not so much. One particularly damning file was proof that she'd embezzled money from a joint account to fund her secret rendezvous with Greg. It had been a gray area during the divorce proceedings, but now it was a smoking gun. I filed a report with the authorities, ensuring the timing aligned perfectly with Greg's implosion. It wasn't long before she was dragged into the financial scandal. Her face, too, was splashed across headlines, labeled as an accomplice. Employers dropped her faster than I could finish my morning coffee. Her life unraveled faster than I'd anticipated. And for a brief moment, I felt the tiniest pang of guilt. But then I remembered Emily's tears at the wedding and pushed the thought aside. Monica had chosen this path. She'd earned every ounce of misery coming her way. The final move was personal. Emily deserved the truth, no matter how ugly it was. She deserved to know that the people who had caused her father so much pain were the same ones who tried to ruin her wedding. One evening, a week after the wedding disaster, I invited her to dinner. We sat at the kitchen table, the silence between us heavy. Finally, I slid a folder across to her. "What's this?" she asked, her brow furrowing. "Everything," I said simply. She opened it, her eyes scanning the pages. Photos, emails, receipts. All the evidence of Monica's betrayal and Greg's part in it. The color drained from her face as she read. "Dad, why are you showing me this now?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Because you need to understand who they really are," I said. "You deserve better than their lies." Emily didn't speak for a long time. When she finally looked up at me, there were tears in her eyes, but her expression was hard, determined. "I don't know if I can ever forgive them," she said quietly. "You don't have to," and I replied. "But you'll never have to forgive yourself for not knowing the truth." In the weeks that followed, the fallout from my actions rippled across every corner of their lives. Greg was bankrupt, disgraced, and under investigation. Monica was jobless, her name tarnished beyond repair. Emily cut off contact with both of them, choosing to focus on her new life with her husband. As for me, for the first time in years, I felt something resembling peace. Not happiness, not yet, but a sense of satisfaction, knowing I'd reclaimed the power they'd tried to steal from me. Sometimes justice isn't enough. Sometimes you have to burn the whole damn thing to the ground. Monica's parents had always looked at me like I was an outsider. They were old money, the kind of people who could trace their lineage back to people who owned ships or banks, while I grew up in a working-class neighborhood. When Monica and I first started dating, her father, Charles, hadn't even tried to hide his disdain. I wasn't worthy of his daughter, according to him, but he tolerated me because Monica had insisted I was the one. Her mother, Evelyn, had been worse, with her passive-aggressive comments and polite but cutting remarks. Even during our marriage, every visit to their mansion felt like walking into an icebox. Still, I put up with it for Monica's sake, thinking we were a team. But after the affair, they'd made their stance clear. Monica was their blood, their family. They chose her, even after knowing what she'd done. It wasn't just that they supported her. They had actively tried to bury me. Charles used his connections to smear my name during the divorce proceedings, pushing a narrative that I was controlling, vindictive, and emotionally unstable. Evelyn had made sure their circle of high society friends whispered about me at charity galas and cocktail parties. They'd painted Monica as the victim, a woman who had made a mistake but was unfairly vilified by her bitter ex-husband. If they wanted a war, I'd give them one. Charles was a man who thrived on appearances. His wealth, his status, his pristine reputation, it was everything to him. But like most men who spend decades at the top, he had skeletons in his closet. It didn't take much digging to find them. Through a contact in finance, I discovered that Charles had been skimming off the top of his charity fundraisers for years. The man who paraded himself as a pillar of the community was pocketing money meant for underprivileged children. It was disgusting, and it was exactly the kind of thing that could destroy him. Using an anonymous email account, I leaked the documents to a local journalist who had a reputation for exposing corruption. Within days, headlines splashed across every major outlet. Benevolent billionaire or fraud, investigating Charles Alden's missing millions. The article was a masterpiece, detailing not only the misappropriated funds, but also his attempts to cover it up with fake bookkeeping and offshore accounts. Charles's world crumbled almost overnight. Sponsors pulled out of his events, charities severed ties with him, and the city council launched an investigation. His face, once plastered on billboards as a model citizen, became the symbol of greed and deceit. Evelyn's currency was her social circle. She thrived on being the center of attention at garden parties and luncheons, where she could flaunt her pearls and sip champagne while gossiping about anyone who didn't meet her standards. But her world was fragile, built entirely on perception. Through the same investigator I'd used for Greg, I uncovered a dirty little secret. Evelyn had been having an affair of her own. For over a decade, she'd been seeing a much younger man, a tennis instructor of all people, paying for his lifestyle with hush money siphoned from her husband's accounts. It was the kind of scandal that would obliterate her pristine image. I made sure the information reached the right ears. A series of anonymous tips landed in the inboxes of the city's most influential socialites. By the time Evelyn showed up for her next luncheon, the whispers had already begun. "She's been seeing him for years, someone said loud enough for her to hear. "I heard he lives in that new high-rise downtown," another chimed in. Evelyn tried to act unbothered, but I'd seen that look on her face before, the same one Monica had when I confronted her. The unraveling had begun. Within weeks, invitations stopped coming. Evelyn Alden, once the queen of high society, became a pariah. The Aldens prided themselves on their legacy. They had a family estate that had been passed down for generations, a sprawling mansion on the outskirts of the city. It wasn't just a house. It was a symbol of their status, their history, their power. Taking it from them would be the final nail in the coffin. Through a series of strategic moves, I bought the debt on the property. Charles had been leveraging the estate to cover the fallout from his financial scandal, and he was drowning in legal fees. By the time I made my move, he had no choice but to sell. When the papers were signed, I drove to the estate, stood on the front lawn, and stared up at the grand facade. It was a beautiful house, no doubt, but it was tainted with the same rot that had infected the Aldens for generations. I didn't keep it. Instead, I sold it to a developer who promptly announced plans to demolish it and turn the land into a public park. The Aldens' ancestral home was reduced to rubble within months, their legacy wiped from the map. Monica called me one evening, her voice frantic. "What the hell are you doing, Michael?" "My parents. Your parents declared war on me. The moment they tried to ruin my life, I said calmly. I'm just finishing what they started. They're my family, she shouted. They made their choice, I replied. Now, they get to live with it. There was a pause, and when she spoke again, her voice was softer. What about Emily? She doesn't need this. This doesn't touch Emily, I said. It never will. But you and your parents? You're done. In the weeks that followed, the Aldens faded into obscurity. Charles and Evelyn retreated from public life, their reputations destroyed. Monica, jobless and with no safety net, was left to pick up the pieces on her own. As for me, I found peace in the silence that followed. The storm had passed, and for the first time in years, I felt free. They had tried to destroy me, but in the end, I had taken everything from them. Months after the dust had settled, I found myself sitting on a park bench overlooking the grounds where the Alden estate once stood. The developer had done a good job. The park was beautiful, lush greenery, winding paths, and a playground where children laughed and ran without a care in the world. It was a fitting replacement for a house that had stood as a monument to greed and arrogance. Emily called occasionally, her voice bright and full of hope for her future. She didn't ask about her mother or her grandparents anymore, and I didn't bring them up. That chapter of her life was closed, and I had no intention of reopening it. One afternoon, as I watched the sun dip below the horizon, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from an unknown number. You've taken everything. Was it worth it? I didn't need to guess who it was from. My reply was simple. Yes. Sliding the phone back into my pocket, I leaned back, the warmth of the setting sun on my face. For the first time in years, I felt the weight lift completely. It was over, and I'd won.